victory for the Greeks. This gave the Greeks, obviously, a tremendous incentive to continue on. But again, they weren't going to be stopped by anything geographic in their way. When they came to the next geographical stumbling block, this isthmus of the I forget what it's called. They decided that we create a shortcut. One of the problems that Darius had when he attacked the Greeks is he was caught along the cape of this isthmus, and a huge storm destroyed his navy. So what Xerxes did, he simply dug a canal across. I hope you can see it. It's probably rather small. I'll point it out with the mouse. He dug a canal big enough for his boats to get through. The canal is even still visible today. It's in northern Greece. It's filled in with dirt, but the archaeologists have discovered this was where the canal was. This to me is unbelievable what he would do in order to reach Greece. He stopped at nothing. It was not a great success. They crossed the Hellespont. He crossed the Battle of Thermopylae, and the Greeks dragged him into a battle in the Bay of Salamis, where the Greeks had little boats and the Persians had big boats, and there were too many boats in this small area. The Greeks made mincemeat of the Persians. They danced circles around them, and it was a tremendous failure. The Persians retreated because they were afraid that their pontoon bridge would be destroyed and they would be stuck in Europe and not have a way to get back to Asia. And Xerxes retreated with them. He left someone in charge, and the last battle was the third battle was, I forgot the name now. You'll have to. I apologize. But again, at the battle, here it is, the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE. But the Persian forces were defeated and killed, effectively ending the Persian invasion of Greece. If we go back to the Megillah, there are 4 years missing between the first chapter and the second chapter. These are the years that these wars are taking place. But there's not one word mentioned of the wars because the Persians lost. And there's no way that any document is going to leave Persia that makes Ahasuerus look bad. This is the battle plan of the Battle of Plataea, where the blue were the Greeks and the red were the Persians. What he did manage to do is force the Greeks to unify. Up until then, there had been various city-states, Athens, Sparta, even though in the first war, Xerxes had basically burned Athens to the ground. They regrouped, they recovered. He retreats back to Persia, and that basically ends his attempt to conquer Greece, ends his ambitions to take over Europe and spread the empire even further. Now, what's interesting is he goes back to Persia and he says, okay, regroup, going to refocus now on building from the inside. And he sets out for, this shows the Greeks once again, the last battle. He sets his mind into huge building projects, building a palace twice as big as his father's palace had been, Darius's palace, of just remarkable proportions. And here's another picture that shows us intricately colorful painted walls, very different than the Greek style, but tremendously impressive. And he's still a very wealthy man, but he's now in tremendous danger because he lost the war and he lost all of the armies and forces and supplies and everything that were provided to him by the 127 satraps. He's coming back to Persia with his tail between his legs, and he is in danger because this could lead to a disintegration of his empire. He's going to try and impress people by, look how big and strong and I still am, but they're not convinced. And he is in a tremendous danger. And there is an assassination attempt. It's mentioned to us in the Megillah, Bigtan and Teresh. And who happens to overhear them and tell the king about it? Mordechai. Now we get back to Megillah Esther. Immediately after this assassination attempt, Xerxes realizes that his life is in danger, not just his empire. And all the important, impressive buildings are not going to save him. and he retreats from public life. It's immediately after the assassination attempt is when he appoints an outsider, not a Persian, someone with no claim to the throne, Haman, to basically become his front person, his prime minister. And Xerxes becomes a hermit locked inside his palace. And he continues to run things from behind the scenes, but he's afraid, with good reason. He's just wasted the forces of his entire empire, and he realizes that the chances of his empire staying together are not very good. So he puts Haman out in front, and Haman is supposed to take over. The opulence of the empire, of the palace, is remarkable. Much of it is still available to be seen today. And what's remarkable to us is that whoever has written the Megillah is intimately familiar with this building. If we don't even pay attention to it usually, I don't know, I don't, but I'm in shul, but there are 9 specific locations within the palace that are mentioned in the Megillah. I'll just name them for you. First, it refers to Beit HaMelech, but in the Beit HaMelech, there is Chatzar Beit HaMelech, the courtyard of the king, probably his private residences within the palace. And then that has a Ginat Chatzar Beit HaMelech, that has an indoor garden, or a garden within the complex. When Esther is brought to the king, she's put into Beit HaNashim, Al Yad Haggai. So Haggai is in charge of all the young women who were forced to come to the international beauty contest. But after her night with the king, she doesn't go back to this. She goes to Beit HaNashim Hasheni. There is another area called for the harem, and it's not where she started off from. When she has the party for the king with the wine party with the king and Haman and herself, it's in Bitan HaMelech, not Beit HaMelech, Bitan HaMelech. It's in a separate area. And when the king gets up and leaves in the middle after Esther accuses Haman, he goes out to Ginat Bitan HaMelech, that has separate garden for that area of the area, and he comes back into the Beit HaMishteh, where the party had been taking place, another location. We know, of course, that Mordechai was famous because he was known for sitting in the gateway to the king's palace, Sha'ar HaMelech, where the important people would sit and probably hold court. So whoever's written this Megillah knows this building. So the claim that it's written centuries later is probably not well founded. And in fact, here's an aerial view. You can see the different gardens within the building. This is an artist representation of based on the archaeological findings. And I think that part of the top of the screen is the private residences of the king. We saw the entranceway at the bottom right of the screen, and on the left side was another banquet area. All of these different areas were used during those 180 days. During the 180-day party mentioned in the first chapter, there's no location. It's just in Beit HaMelech. We don't know where because it was probably everywhere, entertaining all the different international groups, either one at a time or simultaneously in different areas. But each group had to be given its proper respect and honor in order to get them on board. What's fascinating is that none of this is mentioned in the Megillah. And I think the answer is quite clear. It's because she lost the war. And if you lost the war, you can't mention that. And however, here's another depiction just to show you the grandeur of the palace. The parts on the left are archaeological remains in a museum somewhere, probably Britain. And just to show you where it would have fit in with the building on the right side. Very, very impressive. The Megillah refers also to in the 7-day party, they drank from golden vessels. The Persians were famous, according to the Greeks anyway, famous for beautiful gold and silver and all of that is described also in the first chapter. This is a wine chalice. This is another wine chalice. And again, the opulence is indescribable. This is the gateway of the palace of Xerxes. This has survived till today. And this is what it looks like today. the archaeological remains. From these remains, archaeologists have basically been able to put together what we saw in the artist's depiction of what the building looked like, and it fits with the description of the Megillah. Like I say, 9 separate locations within this palace are mentioned in the Megillah, and the archaeologists have found basically where that was at the time. This is the tomb of the Achaemenid kings. In August of 465 BCE, Xerxes was in fact assassinated by the commander of the royal bodyguard, Artabanus. This Artabanus had delusions of usurping the throne and ousting the Achaemenid dynasty, but it was a rather unrealistic expectation, despite his support from the religious establishment. Religious revolutions seemed to be popular in Persia. Artabanus, in the meantime, managed to appoint his 7 sons to key positions within the government. And however, the Achaemenids decided they were not going to ride off quietly into the sunset. The story gets a bit complicated here. Eventually, Xerxes' son Artaxerxes killed Artabanus and all his sons. Sounds familiar in the Megillah story. And the Achaemenid dynasty continued with Artaxerxes. The irony of Xerxes' career is that he's probably responsible for those tiny individual Greek city-states unifying into a single entity, which became the Greek Empire. His goal was to squash the Greek Empire, nip it in the bud before it grew into a threat. And the result was he basically was the catalyzer to create the Greek Empire. It was more unified than it was when Xerxes launched his war against them. Alexander the Great went to great pains to vilify Xerxes and to make him look like the bad guy in history. No surprise there. And unfortunately, very few Persian historical records have survived. Even though we know he had his chronicles, he has them read to him at the nighttime, everything was written down, but very little of it has survived. You have to imagine that if Megillat Esther makes reference to the Persian chronicles, it's basically saying to us, if you don't believe me, go check it out with the Persian chronicles. You'll find the same story. We don't have the Persian chronicles. All we have are the Greek records, which have survived pretty much today. They're still being published, they're still being read, they're still being studied. And these monumental buildings, this is another picture of the ruins from the Palace of Susa. To finish off, I just want to give you a little insight into the religion of Persia, which I think really sheds light on the subject. The official religion of the Persian Empire was Zoroastrianism. It became the official religion 100 years before the story of Persia. It lasted up until the Muslim conquest. Part of we think of Zoroastrianism as being, polytheistic, and the truth of the matter is it claims to be monotheistic, although it has what they call dualistic cosmology. In other words, it's divided into subcategories. So their main deity is called Ahura Mazda, but even Ahura Mazda has got sort of subcategories. There's the Spenta Mainyu, which is the creative, positive mentality. But on the other side, there's the Angra Mainyu, which is the destructive spirit, the chaos. And part of the belief of Zoroastrianism is there's this constant battle going on between let's call them the forces of good and the forces of evil. And sometimes one is up and sometimes the other is up. But when one is up, there's not much you can do to stop it. This makes perfect sense to us. When Xerxes attacks Greece, he wins the first battle, good, but he loses the second, and then he's wiped out in the third. And at that point, he realizes that Spenta Mainyu has taken over the forces of chaos in the world, and there's nothing he's going to be able to do to turn that around. So he retreats. He's launched this tremendous war, but he's convinced that the spirits of Ahura Mazda are against him at that point. We see it again in the Megillah when Haman comes to his family after the king has had him take Mordechai out for a ride through the streets and proclaim his greatness, and Haman is disgraced by having to pull the horse around. And his wife says to him, if Mordechai is from the descendants of the Jews, then you will be lost in everything you have, because you will certainly fall before him. In other words, Mordechai is on the up and up. He's experiencing the spenta minyu, the positive forces, and you are experiencing the agra minyu, which means that you're on the downward slope. There's nothing you can do to stop it. That fits perfectly with Zoroastrian beliefs. It was prevalent everywhere in Persia. Today, they say there's between 120, 150,000 people left in the world still practicing Zoroastrianism. But what's fascinating is that although Xerxes lost the war against Greece and almost lost the entire empire, in his burial tomb, which we see before us, is a sketching which basically sings his praises, because what we're seeing is this multi-ethnic army. And I don't know if you probably can't read the small writing at the bottom, but it lists the different soldiers according to their ethnic garb. There are Persians, Medians, Elamites, Parthians, Aryans, Bactrians, Sogdians, Khwarezmians, Sarangians, Ecosians, Hindus, Babylonians, Assyrians, Arabs, Egyptians, Armenians, Cappadocians, Lydians, Ionians, Ethiopians. They're all listed there. Each one of those soldiers represents a different ethnicity. So although he lost the war, he was very successful in unifying the biggest coalition of armies in the world at that time. Nothing came close to it. And for that, he's remembered. He did manage to hold the empire together, and they did manage to continue after him also. I just want to close. There's a fascinating quote in the book of Daniel, which refers to Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes, whose mother was, take a guess, Asterissus. Asteris was the Persian name for what we think is Esther. It's very murky. It's not exactly clear, but it makes perfect sense to us. And although at Cyrus, 2 generations before Xerxes had allowed the rebuilding of the temple, Xerxes' father Darius had put a stop work order on the building of the second temple. And Esther was the mother of the next king after Xerxes. And when Darius II, or Artaxerxes as he's known, allows Daniel permission to go back to Jerusalem and continue and complete the second temple, it refers to him as Darius sitting on his throne and the queen behind him. But the word is very strange word. It doesn't use the Hebrew word malka. It uses the word shegel, which is a strange word. And I'd like to share with you an interpretation I got. She wasn't the queen. She was the queen mother. Darius's mother, Esther, according to us, clearly had an influence on her son Artaxerxes. And although Ahasuerus and the first Darius had stopped the work on the second temple, Darius II, Artaxerxes, allowed it to continue. And that's how the second temple was finally completed. So there you have it in a nutshell. Persian history, Greek history, and Jewish history. And they really do fit together. So again, the historians are not of one voice at all. There's a tremendous amount of controversy about who came first and who came second. But to us, it's rather clear. And I hope you enjoy getting a little bit of an insight on how things look from the other side. And when you read or when you listen to the Megillah this year, pay attention to those little cues, and you'll notice a big gap of 4 years in between chapter 1 and chapter 2. The Megillah takes place over a span of 9 years. We sometimes forget that. And if you're interested, follow up on it. There's fascinating books written that explain all of the details and all of the references, the biblical references. If you're interested in the politics of the book, I would recommend this book. It comes out backwards on the Zoom. It's called The Dawn by Yoram Chazoni, which talks about the politics of Persia and the Persian court, and is fascinating. So the Book of Esther, in Hebrew, Esther means hidden, probably hides more than it divulges, but it's definitely worth looking into it. I wish you all a very happy Purim. If anyone has any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was fascinating. Do we have any questions? Any question? Put your hand up if you have a question.
You have to unmute yourselves.
Yes, yeah, and unmute yourself. Oh, Looks like we have no questions. Okay, I guess we've all asked. Stephen has a question. Stephen.
Right. It just occurred to me. You say Esther means like Hester, hidden. Is this? I assume this is the first time that the name Esther has ever appears in any documents.
It could be. It could be. As I say, the Persian name was Asteris, which is remarkably similar to Esther. But Esther herself, that name is taken from a Persian god of Asteris. It was a goddess of fertility, just like Mordechai was the Babylonian god Marduk. So they had Persian names. The theory goes, it's becoming more popular, that they were very assimilated into Persian culture. Remember that in the time of Esther, the time of Cyrus, which was Xerxes' grandfather, they've already gone back to the land of Israel. They were allowed to go back and start rebuilding the temple. They were stopped from completing it, correct. But Mordechai's still in Persia. I thought like the good Jews went back to the land of Israel, but Mordechai is in Persia. I heard a fascinating theory that Mordechai was actually back in Israel, and there was a tremendous amount of trouble trying to get the second temple started, to be rebuilt. And the locals, we refer to them as the Samaritans, wanted to participate, but Zerubbabel told them, no, you shall not be part of our rebuilding of the temple to our God. At which point the Samaritans said, oh no, then we'll stop you from building it. And they sent a sitna, which is like accusations to the Persian king to say, the Jews are building their temple to rebel against you. At which point Darius I stops the building. He presents a stop work order. And it's quite possible, the theory that I read, it appeared in an article in Tradition magazine in 1961, is that Haman was sent by the Samaritans back to Persia to be their representative, to lobby the government for this stop work order. When the Jews found out that the Samaritans had a representative in Susa, in Persia, they said, we need a representative also. Who's got connections? Who's got protexia back in Persia? Mordechai. And in fact, in the beginning of the Book of Ezra, he gives a list of all the main families of the VIPs who returned to Israel with him. And Mordechai is mentioned at the beginning of the Book of Ezra. However, at the end of Book of Ezra, the list is given again, and Mordechai's name is missing. So that gives rise to this theory that he was sent back to Persia to lobby on behalf of the Jews. When he gets there, he finds out Haman has done a lot more damage than he realizes it. And the big issue now is not rebuilding the temple, but stopping the genocide, which he's successful at. And at the end, the last chapter of the Book of Esther, it says, Mordechai Yehudi Ratzui l'rov echav. He was beloved by most of his people. In other words, not everyone. They said, we sent you to get the temple work stoppage rescinded, and you failed at that. And Mordechai said, yes, but I managed to save the Jewish people. So yes, Esther's name appears in a very similar format. Historians will argue that it's not her, she never existed, there was no such thing. Okay, they have their narrative, and we have ours.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Joe has a question. Yes, Joe and Chaim. Joe and then Chaim. Can't hear you.
Follow on from about Esther's name. I mean, is Mordechai a Jewish name before that?
Yes, even the Megillah tells us her name. Her Jewish name was Hadassah. And her Persian name was Esther.
Right, but Mordechai, what about Mordechai?
Oh, there's very interesting theories if Mordechai had a Jewish name. I don't know, and some of them are very midrashic, and I heard there's a line from the Book of Psalms that says, "Tachat ha'matzutz yaleh sirpod v'tachat something else yaleh barosh." Oh, so if in place of the thistle will arise the Hadassah, the myrtle tree, and in place of the thorns will arise barosh. So if this was referring to Esther, then Mordechai's Hebrew name would have been barosh, which means cedar. It's a nice little a play on words, but I wouldn't go so far as to check his Teudat Zehut to see if that was really his name. Chaim, did you have a question as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, the present day Iranian come Persians, are they direct descendants of the Persians of Esther's time?
Brilliant question. I wish I knew the answer. They seem to be following in the footsteps of them. Bombastic, unrealistic expectations, religious beliefs that are not so realistic. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. We'll have to study that question and I'll get back to you on it.
We have another question from Stephen. Yes, Stephen.
I understand that Esther and Mordechai's tomb is in Persia, so that obviously means that Mordechai did end up in Persia. Do you have any information as to the veracity of whether that really is their tombs? Are there tombs? And I don't know, there are other stories about it that you can offer.
It's a great question, and I wish you had asked me that yesterday or the day before, because I wanted to bring there's a YouTube clip available of visiting the tomb of Mordechai and Esther in Persia. Look it up; you'll find it with no trouble whatsoever. I think it was filmed by some French crew, and there may be several of them. So there is a location in modern day Iran that is referred to as the tomb of Mordechai and Esther. Fascinating. I haven't heard any testimony of how old it is, but it takes you inside, and they've got a little shul there. When people go there to daven and pray. I wouldn't put it on your itinerary if you. I wouldn't go to Persia today, to Iran today, just to see that. But somebody filmed it, and there's a Persian Gentile fellow who's got the key, and he lets people in there because he lives nearby there. I can't attest to its validity. What I will tell you, and which I think is just not as significant, but also significant, is that the tradition of Mordechai and Esther continued in Iran. So whether or not this tomb is 2,500 years old or only 1,000 years old, what it tells us is that there was a tradition of Mordechai and Esther. We think of the Book of Esther as being a wonderful story with a happy ending. It's not a happy ending. Esther is stuck in Achashverosh's palace for the rest of her life. She's never allowed out. That's the end of her life. She is living there. The Gemara in Sanhedrin asked the question, like, if they were so frum, how could she marry a goy? It's a silly question, actually, but they have to sort of come up with a theory like this to sort of vindicate Esther, and basically she had to save the Jews from genocide, but that her fate was sealed as a result. So she's very much a heroine in our tradition, and apparently in Persian Jewry also, because they have a tomb to go pray at or to visit. Again, our narrative makes it what's important to us. Whether or not it is historically accurate, I don't know. I'm less concerned about it. I hope that answers your question, at least partially. YouTube it, you'll find the visit to the tomb. It's fascinating.
Okay, Ian, we have a question from Ian Banks.
Yeah, not a question actually. It's just something. Steve, you jogged my memory, because when we were at the Merkaz Klita, which was years ago, a couple from Iran joined us, and their names were Mordechai and Esther. Amazing couple, and they made the journey partly on foot, partly by donkey, and only the second part of the journey was by air.
Wow!
Because of course they couldn't come direct; they had to go through I don't know, one of the stands or two of the stands or whatever it was. Yeah. But that was 83, 82, 83. Yeah.
I had
Val was there as well.
I was, yes. I think those are the names that they chose when they got to Israel.
Would make sense.
I'd like to think that those are original names, so don't ruin my night, all right?
I think they have Persian names.
Could be. I went to yeshiva many years ago with two fellows from Detroit, Michigan, in the United States, who were the descendants of Persian Jews. And the one who was in my class, his name was Koresh, which is Hebrew for Cyrus, and his brother's name was Daryavesh, which was Hebrew for Darius. So there was a tremendous pride in Persian history. I mean, Koresh and Daryavesh were not Jewish kings, but there was a tremendous pride in the history of the Persian people, even amongst the Jews, which would make sense. Anyway,
okay.
If I was just going to say this, if Daryavesh II was in fact the son of Esther, then he was Jewish.
yes, yes, but he wasn't brought up Jewish, that's for sure. He was brought up as a Zoroastrian.
Okay, so thank you very, very much indeed. Have a wonderful Purim, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next month, whatever we do next month.
Very good.
Thank you all
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Right.